Welcome to Let's Take a Walk, brought to you by the Feld Group Institute. Here we'll be diving into insightful conversations with Charlie, covering everything from critical strategic blind spots to overlooked assets that drive value every day. We recorded this episode live with our community on a new series of monthly community calls designed to support and inform our community members. In this conversation, we dive deep into leadership, technology, and the art of storytelling with two seasoned leaders, Charlie and Rob Carter. Rob, who spent 25 years as CIO at FedEx, has been instrumental in driving innovation and shaping the future of tech leadership. From historical analogies to digital transformation, we'll uncover how great leaders adapt, inspire, and drive change. Plus, we'll discuss the crucial role of agility in staying relevant in today's fast-paced world. So whether you're a seasoned executive or an emerging leader, get ready for insights that will transform the way you think about leadership, technology, and the future of work. Here's Charlie.
This is really a lot of fun for me. Rob has been the CIO at FedEx for 25 years, and for those of you that have worked in this industry, riding a Bronco for that many years, right, and staying on it is just pretty incredible in and of itself. But FedEx has been an amazing company in that it's grown from 10 billion to 90 billion uh, during his time in as a CIO, and have been through many technology cycles as it's really changed the world. And we saw it in COVID. If FedEx and their friends weren't working, nobody ate. Nobody had clothes. Nobody had anything. Nobody had vaccines. So it's a pretty amazing company. And he's kind of viewed as the most durable success in our profession, or at least one of them. In fact, people are starting to refer to him as a goat, right? Not an old goat like me, but the goat like Tom Brady in terms of his tenure. And Rob has always been great about giving back and participating. So I invited him to come talk to us today. By way of introduction, I met Rob in when he first became CIO. I was CIO at Delta Airlines, and we met immediately, hit it off, and I invited him and his team to come to Dallas about 2000, 2001, to come to Dallas and review the Feld Group framework, which is pretty much the stuff we're still teaching you guys. And Rob brought his team down and, became attracted to it and has used much of it over the years. So, Rob, if you could just kind of go back 25 years and kind of relive that day or two that you spent with us and what it's meant to you.
Well, it's great to see so many familiar faces out there, FedExers and otherwise, people that I've known over that arc of time. But frankly, I was leaning into the goat is what I was doing way back then. Charlie was famous. Now, most CIOs were afraid of Charlie because when he showed up, it usually wasn't all that good of a sign for you. It was usually the board or the CEO bringing the Feld Group in, and there was a new sheriff in town. But I had a great belief that our profession was really just coming of age. That the CIO profession at that point in time was still pretty nascent because frankly technology was still nascent. It hadn't really settled on a core set of disciplines. And what I was attracted to the Feld Group about was that ICAP and the intellectual property that represented what I believe to be the set of disciplines that were necessary for great CIOs and great technology teams to support the businesses that they were a part of.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that one of the things that happened 10 years later when I left corporate life is Rob actually initiated the Institute by getting me to think about why don't you teach this to more people? And, by the way, I've got a couple of hundred vice presidents and directors in FedEx that I'd like to go through this thing. So we started the institute at FedEx, and it grew into what it's grown into, which is kind of an independent uh, place where operating people from all different industries and all different companies not only get something out of the framework, but over the years put something into the framework. And I think the it's a framework of frameworks, so it doesn't really fight with COBIT or BizBach or IDLE or anything else. It consumes it and incorporates it. So it's pretty unique in that way. But Rob and I have been, my example stopped, 15 years ago, but I've been vicariously living through Rob's adventures with him, kind of riding shotgun with FedEx, among other things. But we've spent a lot of time together over the last 15 years in particular. And there are so many things we can talk about that when I started thinking about the podcast, I started thinking, how would you begin to narrow it down into something that would be meaningful to people? And I narrowed it to kind of three big leadership traits that I wanted Rob to talk about, because seriously, it is very difficult. I think the CIO role is the toughest job on the executive committee, period. Right? I mean, I've seen it in so many different companies, but the demands outstrip the ability to afford it, make any sense out of it, and everything else. So I would love for Rob to share with you um, kind of three things that I saw in him that pretty pretty unique. Uh, One is he's so curious. I mean, he's a continuous learner. I've gotten more book assignments from him where he read a book and said, "You need to read this book," right? It would have nothing to do with technology. I've been to so many dinners with him where he not only explained the wine, but where it came from and why that was a great year for that wine.
You
So
don't
just,
drink, Charlie, so
and I don't drink, so
I
yeah.
was talking to myself.
I could always drive home, but this trait of continuous learning is something that I value, but I think it is really, really important for you guys, given that you have no time to do your job, spend time with your family, right? And just go to the next, put one foot in front of the other. It's really important that you kind of think about being a continuous learner. So, Rob, I don't know where that came from or how that evolved in you, but it's just a part of your fabric.
Well, I do love it. I'll admit I won't push that one aside. I'll say I stay curious, and I find curiosity to be just one of the great ways to figure things out, because there's so much to be gained by looking at examples in the world around us, learning, reading. And I had, I mean, I had my dream job for all those years. I started out as the CTO at the company in 1998 and retired last year as the CIO after having done that since 2000. But, there was nothing static about the world of FedEx or the world that we lived in during those years. So if you couldn't stay curious and if you couldn't learn, you would clearly fall behind. By the way, I've got a book assignment for you all right now. So no surprise. Reading one of the most fascinating and most curiosity, inciting books I've read in a long time. It's a book called The End of the World is Only the Beginning by Peter Zehan. And if you think the world's kind of wobbling right now, you got to go grab this book, drop it on your Kindle, whatever. Peter Zehan wrote Accidental Superpower, which was the first of his things that I read. We brought him in to talk to the FedEx executive team at one point. I won't get way off track, But you got to look for stuff like that. You got to tune your ear to when people say something like that, saying, well, maybe that's worth going and checking out. But I believe if you're not learning, you're dying. And I really feel like I've just been super fortunate in my life to have great experiences and great opportunity to learn from people like Charlie, to learn from many of you as scan through the 100 people out there. So many familiar names. I could think of so many situations we'd all been in where we learned together. I didn't show up as the poobah. I mean, it was all about learning and growing as a team. So I do love curiosity. I think it's a high order sign of leadership when people are curious, when they're not just judgmental or stubborn about what they think they know, but they're ready to go learn.
Yeah, how do you, if I feel that I've continuously tried to learn, but I'm getting overwhelmed now, right? I mean, seriously, just I stayed up on the technology over the years, but boy, it's just different staying up on it. And every time you turn a corner, there's another corner coming at you. It's like a bad movie in terms of the amount of change that's coming so fast. Same thing's true in economics, right? Tariffs on, tariffs off. What is that going to mean for this? Right? Same thing. You got to have an economic background to understand that. Same thing's true for history. And I know this book you were talking about, I actually got it after I got my assignment. That there's a framework for geopolitical systems. Where do you go when you have? I'm kind of retired and I'm getting overwhelmed. It's hard to me to imagine being in an operating role like the folks that are on the screen right now and having the time to to stay up on so many things and it feels like you almost have to take time out to put it on your calendar that I'm going to do this work.
Well, I do think, one thing that most of the FedExers that are on the Zoom here know is that I'm actually not a workaholic. I mean, I was never someone who spent 70, 80 hours a week in the office. I believed that creativity came from not from burning your nose on the grindstone all the time, but from disconnecting and looking, out. And we always talked about up and out. Even in our staff meetings, we wouldn't just focus, on the 5 agenda items that were, kicking our butts. We would do up and out things where we would just say, what's going on in the world around us? How do you look out and see things? And most of that has to do, I believe, Charlie, with relationships. You talk about our relationship, but I love relationships. I met a lot of people and figured out ways to stay connected with, kind of iconic leaders in Silicon Valley or, great business leaders, and mentors like yourself
Mhm.
that helped me all along the way. So it's just super important to not believe that the gerbil wheel is the way that you stay curious and learn. You have to figure out, and most of that has to do with surrounding yourself with great people that you trust, that will do their jobs.
Mhm.
I learned that from Fred Smith at FedEx. Fred said you hire athletes and you put them in their role, and, if they can't do it, then we got to find somebody who will, but you have to trust that they can do their job. When you think of Fred's role and a 500,000 people and, the world turning, 7 by, 24 by 365 and a quarter, there's no way to manage that without a great team
Mhm.
that empowers you and enables you. So curiosity is enabled by making sure that you've surrounded yourself with people that allow you time to disconnect.
Yeah, I think when I came up, the world was slower. I mean, by definition, things moved in decades, not in weeks and days like they're moving now. But companies like IBM and GE and, PepsiCo and spent a lot of effort on leadership development, sending people, taking them out of their job for a couple of months and sending them to Harvard Business School. And, um, the ability to develop your team. The second characteristic that I saw, in addition to the curiosity, which leads to creativity and being able to connect dots, to come up with solutions, not just the technology, but in the context of where the world is going. But the second trait that I admired in a world that moved away from it was your holistic caring about your team and developing your team, right? FedEx was one of the few places that was committed, and more you than even FedEx, to promote from within, to bring people in from interns and bring them up. Not that you didn't go out from time to time, but it wasn't the main thing. It was kind of a throwback. What drove you to that kind of leadership development investment that you made when you said to us, you gotta, everybody's going to go through this. And it wasn't just IT. Remember, we had a SMU professor that was part of the philosophy and values that we taught. You had Cindelania. You had a lot of different people in there developing your leadership team. What what advice do you have to people now? They're not getting developed by their company necessarily, but maybe in a position to help develop their people.
Well, I think to some degree, Charlie, it came from me loving to go explore and learn and do things. So, I mean, I connected with Larry Sin at Sin Delaney. I connected with you. I connected with Jim Lair down at the Human Performance Institute, and those were all things that allowed me to grow, me to learn new things. And so loving that for yourself, can quickly turn around to loving it for your team as well, because I got so much benefit from connecting with others. I have a mantra that, is still true to this day, and it connects some of these things. It says, work hard. This is hard work. What we do is, I don't want to act like, anyone gets to be lazy or just spend their time reading books doing this work. I mean, you got to turn the crank, work hard, but lead a balanced life. Have goals outside of just that hard work, and then ultimately have an undying respect for people. So, this is a people business, and sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we think it's a speeds and feeds business, or, the next generation of tech that's, crashing onto the beach and changing. This is a people business, and so you have to reward people with developing them. I mean, there are a lot of people on this call that have spent time with you as a reward, frankly. A lot of them also went to Deloitte University and got their opportunity to sit through the CIO program at Deloitte, and other things as I think back. And there are several people, like Cisco Sanchez, that did start as interns, and work their way up to, Cisco was the CIO of FedEx Ground when he left to be the CIO of Qualcomm. So there are so many people that, use those learnings and really, manage to grow in the context of learning and working hard, and hopefully at the same time respecting the people around them that help them to accomplish so much. And that's what we recognized, is that as they learn and grew and established relationships, they accomplished a lot. Those things aren't separate. It's not some luxury, to have a great culture of learning. It's one of the things that brings with it great accomplishment.
Yeah, yeah, I think that people underplay when we talked about the transformative nature of the technology now. It's going to have a huge impact on the organization and the culture of the organization. I mean, you can't just change the technology without changing the way you're structured, the way your processes work, the culture. People have grown up in a very industrial model where very vertical and narrow. So it's not a luxury to invest in leadership development. We're seeing a renaissance of that now. People are at the senior levels are saying, yeah, we've got to hold on to our people. We've got to reskill, and relationships matter because, you used to be able to get in a vertical industrial model, get the roles and responsibilities worked out. This is more of a hockey game. I mean, you're going down the court, you better have somebody next to you that is ready to skate with you to the puck. So it is a massive transformation driven by the technology, but so much of it is a cultural transformation, and having the right people on the right team with the right culture and attitude is going to pay big benefits. And that is something that we're in, um, trying to get that revived. And I see some of the consulting firms you mentioned, Deloitte, and are trying to go back and not treat people as a commodity. I think there have been a decade or two in there where everybody's replaceable, right? And it's not true. I mean, when somebody leaves a company, it takes a long cycle to get somebody back on board that understands and can work inside that culture. Uh, I know we don't have endless time here, but I want to get into the third trait, which I don't think any of these are more important than the other, but this is a game changer, and that's the theme that we're on. One of the things that I saw in you was you're a great storyteller, and I'm sure it comes from being curious because you have a lot of experience and you can connect dots, right? And also, culturally developing people. But the third trait is, how do you put it together, and how do you tell a story? Because we deal in a complex world. I mean, sometimes I think about the level of complexity we deal with. If one wire breaks somewhere around the globe, everything stops, right? And it is a complex topic. And if you want to try and explain architecture to people, if you want to, how do you think about putting together the stories? Because I've watched you do I could name six things that you've done over the years that actually change the leadership team's thought process at FedEx without really selling them anything, just kind of including them in a story. Right? How do you take complex things and make them simple?
Well, the first thing you have to do is look for analogs that are understandable in the business. And so when you talk about the four horsemen of dominant design, I talked about the railroads and the development of the networks and how standards emerged and interconnectivity began to work more effectively. And, most of them hadn't really studied the concept of dominant design. And dominant design is fascinating because technology at that point in time had gone through wave after wave of proprietary design, but it was beginning to emerge. There was a dominant design that was beginning to emerge, and it wasn't what we had. It wasn't mainframes, and it wasn't, kind of, client server of, five different versions. It was a unique set of technologies that were becoming, like the railroads. I mean, 4 foot 8.5 inches on center on the rail. I mean, it was something that you could lock and load on. And it was really important for me to describe technological architecture, modernization, and the path we needed to be on in terms that would give them pause to think about, oh, I get that. How did the plug in the wall that we plug our electrical appliances into wind up looking like that? It didn't always look like that. There were 50, 100 different versions of that thing before the dominant design emerged, and we could all sort of plug in and go. So those analogs were super important to me. I realized that pretty early in my career. My undergraduate was in the 70s in computer science. And I came out, with reasonable technical chops for the time, but I quickly realized that the technology teams didn't speak the language of the business. And you had to begin to figure out ways, if you wanted to get the business partnership that was really necessary to deliver, technology that was going to change the game, then you absolutely had to figure out ways to explain what you were doing. And this idea of, oh, we'll take care of that, you don't need to know that, was
Hmm.
foolishness in my mind. They had to understand what you were doing in ways that would allow them to help pull whatever program that you were trying to deliver for the business forward, because it was about the business. It wasn't about the technology. So Four Horsemen was a great one, talking about dominant design. Tale of Two Networks was a great one to describe the digital twin. I talked about how transportation and physical networks developed over centuries to get to the point where they were. And then I started talking about how technology and digital networks were there. And it was great to be at FedEx because our story was so understandable. We had packages moving through networks, but we had a digital twin of the data of that package moving through our technological networks. And so it would spark this curiosity, not just at FedEx, but any place you told that story, because people began to understand what a digital twin was and how you could manage things in a virtual world, that would have great effect on what actually happens in the physical world. So I'll stop there because I know we're out of time, but storytelling for me was all about, interesting things in history that were analogs that you could relate to the work in front of you and why you should go aggressively down this path as a business.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more thing. We'll close with this and maybe I'll come visit you and we can keep talking without a podcast. But uh, one of the biggest hurdles to get over is and you got over it somehow, is changing people from thinking about big projects that go on for years with value at the end of it to composite solutions. I remember you had the orchestra pit and, capabilities. And it was kind of important at FedEx because FedEx was a federated model and capabilities. The only way to deal with that is to talk about which capabilities needed to be common and which ones would be unique. And how do I build Lego blocks, right? Again, I was not in some of those meetings where you actually laid some of that stuff out, but somehow the transition from projects to capabilities, from centralization versus decentralization to common and unique capabilities, somewhere in there was a story to be told, right?
Well, we owe a lot of that to the Feld Group and to you and to Childress and so many others that came along over time. And Russ Wheaton's on this call, Cisco Sanchez. These guys were running architecture for us at the time, and we began to talk about composable
Hmm.
architectures. We began to talk about business services and things that we did. We could talk about tracking and customer and rate and route and clearance and things. And we talked about those things not as applications that were big vertical behemoths, but we talked about them as capabilities that were assemblable, if that's a word, and that you could put together, horizontally to create business process instead of these big vertical behemoths that we had that were monoliths that combined all that stuff in one place. And then therefore, all those capabilities got replicated time and time again. Address was a great example where, as far as I know, address is a pretty definitive service, but we had it scattered in every system for the
Hmm.
longest time until we said, well, why don't we extract that, create an address service that is a much more, reliable and trusted and definitive source of the specificity required about an address so that we weren't showing different things in different systems when we talked about a place on the planet. that
Yep.
we needed to pick up packages and deliver packages or where someone lived or an employee lived. It was all address, and address became a service. And that's a great example of extracting a capability and putting it out there as a service. We talked about the iTunes, revolution of, of how, it used to be really crazy out there in the musical world. And then iTunes came along and you could, buy a tune for 99 cents, and it didn't have, viruses or bugs in it. It was an authentic copy. The artist got rewarded for it. You got it inexpensively. And, that was sort of the story that we told back then that everybody could relate to about what a service was and why it was important to build those versus replicating functionality in every application.
Yep. Well, that's great, Rob. We're going to try and incorporate some of these storytelling things in the community to give our folks that have been part of this better tools to work with, better ways to tell the story. And I think you've outlined, a few that I think finding an analog that people can relate to and relating it back, I think is a key.
And if,
Um,
if I could say, Charlie, I know
yeah,
I'm interrupting, but
no,
John was mentioning earlier those little snippets that are out there in the ICAP. There's one on exactly this from Kenny that is just fantastic. And I was up at the CIA recently because they had asked me to come up and talk to them about architecture. And I dragged that video there and I showed it to all the technology leadership, including across the Department of Defense, because they had shown up. And they were blown away by how simple that construct of the box top and pieces of capabilities are, because they have a complexity problem that's mind numbing.
mhm,
And so they're off and running with that construct right now as their key architectural principle, composable unit of what they need to do, as opposed to the blitzkrieg of things that span all of their units.
thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. We may have some questions coming up.
Have actually several great questions for you guys, and we want to take advantage of the time that we have with you. So, first question comes from Cisco.
Rob and Charlie, I know you're not supposed to have any regrets in your life ever, but if you were to come back in time and talk to your younger, up and coming self to say, you know, you should do this sooner, or you should do this faster, or try to do this, what would that guidance be for your younger self?
Well, for my younger self, I mean, I was a little more of a workaholic than Rob was. I had my nose to the grindstone a lot because I wasn't that quick, so I had to work hard. But part way through, I figured out that family matters and balance matters, and that I could, that people around me matter, and that I didn't have to do everything myself, and I had to learn how to trust. But that took a little bit of time to get on with. Uh, it-
Well, I'll be super quick. And it's similar. I mean, and it's what I learned that helped me later was that goals and goaling frameworks shouldn't just be about your professional life and your financial success. Goals needed to span that and family and social and mental and physical and spiritual things that would allow you to have a life that was effective. I called it the balance wheel, and it was a set of goals across all six of those dimensions that helped me, lead a balanced life and help my life feel like it was rolling along smoothly. And I could tell when I had a flat tire that I needed to go assess, all six of those dimensions, because you can feel when your life is thumping along. And when that happens, it affects every other aspect of your life and clearly your professional life. So it's important to set goals, not just for, professional and financial success, but how you want to treat people and situations around you. And mental goals were where all the curiosity goals were. What am I going to read? What am I going to do? Do I need to go back to a class and take some things? So I'll stop because we don't have time, but that's a really important framework that now I try to teach anyone who will listen who's young in their career, because if you get that right early on, I think you can be more effective for the rest of your life.
Thank you, guys.
And our next question comes in, and the question is about how to sell the investment in leadership development. So, what can I do to overcome objections or constraints from CFO or budgeting? And what are more tangible business or financial benefits to sell this investment?
Well, it's hard, and you have to be patient because there's a season for everything. And sometimes it's not a really good idea to go marching in and say we want to start, this relatively expensive cultural or development program. But look for affordable ways to do it too. One of the things that we did a lot was we learned enough on our own to teach it ourselves, and that made for a more effective way to roll things out. So whether it was cultural or technological, I mean, we have so many people that could teach different elements, and we did a lot of brown bag stuff and a lot of things that allowed us to do leadership development, but do it, with just us chickens in the room.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the ability to take and share learnings and do brown bags and get up on a whiteboard. Uh, you know, Mike Childress and I did a deal on how do you walk the halls when there are no halls to walk in a virtual world. You got to be creative. You got to think about how you're going to get people together, right? And uh, but I think that this is an era where I would say the one of the three big functions in a company is HR, right? People have got to be part of this transformation. You're not getting from the industrial era to this digital era any easier than you're going to get from the agrarian era to the industrial era without training and developing people and inspiring them and making them want to change. So, but Rob's right. You got to pick your spots. And generally, as a CIO, there's enough around to go do some of this stuff.
How do you effectively balance the excitement around AI advancements with practical and grounded technology leadership?
It's kind of it's part of the dilemma that we face today. And so there is an awful lot of interesting work going on in AI, but it's really important to stay grounded to the fact, and this one's a tough one right now, and this is part of the reason that, I would say to some degree we're under siege right now as a profession, because there is a shiny new object, that has everybody, looking like a squirrel at it. And AI has been around for a long time. I remember studying Marvin Minsky back, and writing Lisp programs, back early in my career. So artificial intelligence isn't new. GPT is pretty new, and generalized, AI is new, and the chat interface is a pretty incredible tool. And so one thing is, don't resist it. I mean, there is a lot out there to be done with these technologies, and hopefully you're all experimenting with them and staying curious about what they are capable of doing. But at this point in time, all the systems of operations and engagement and systems of transaction and record, they're not immediately being transformed or changed by AI at this point in time. We still have to stay grounded on the technology, and so it's important to point the business towards the relationship between systems of record and systems of engagement and systems of operation and systems of insight. Systems of insight, have a different function than transactional systems that we've all grown up with and are still an important part of every business, because that's where the data comes from that then ultimately, feeds the AI models and helps the business be smarter. So it's the interconnectedness. I call it the infinity loop between those systems of record and the systems of insight that, that are going to create the magic in the future. It's not one or the other. It's an and function.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that now in the next 2 to 3 years, 4 years, getting the plumbing right, getting that address service, getting that customer, you know, if you look at the layered architecture, the most important and durable layer is the data layer, both the system of record and the system of insight, that infinity loop. But the system of record is made up of a lot of legacy stuff, and that is a heavy lift. And if you could get started on that somehow to get it down to where there is, simplification and clarity of that legacy data, you'll be ready when the AI engine hooks the brain to the edge through this nervous system. So I got a simple picture in my head that the big AI is the brain, the AI that Qualcomm's been working on at the edge, right, are the extremities, but you're not getting from the extremity to the brain without going through the nervous system, which is all of the replicated address, customer, product, all the stuff that's in there. So now's the time, however you can figure out how to do it, to start cleaning up that legacy data.
This is such an important one. I even want to jump back in on it because
Yeah.
the story I told around this one is I used one that most everybody could relate to again, but it was a technology story and it was about Uber. And I said, okay, if you're out there, and you're summoning an Uber, there's a system of transaction taking place. There's an operational system that has drivers out there and their locations and GPS and you. And there's a lot of, billing and settlement. Those are all transactional pieces, but there's a brain that's watching that continuously. And so when the plays get out on Broadway, or when the game gets out or the concert gets out, the brain assesses the fact that there's a surge in demand. It begins to summon drivers. It changes pricing dynamically at that point in time. And by the way, it's not just happening where you're standing on the corner 42nd. It's also happening in London and Dubai and everywhere else. So the brain has this ability to assess the network continuously, change the dynamics of pricing, change some of the operational rules at that point in place, and do it on the fly. That's the infinity loop working between the brain and the nervous system and the body at the same time. And so, telling a story like that, and you can perfect it a lot better than what I just did, but telling a story like that gets people to go, oh, I kind of see. There are still these operational systems where you're having to pay the bill or summons the driver or plot the route out. But there's a brain that's watching the thing, and it also, is changing the world, changing the rules dynamically at the same time.
So the question I have is staying relevant. So for long-term employees who still have the zest and vigor for the area of business and knowledge, staying relevant when there's a new administration comes in, that they have their own set of ideas and which are widely accepted. However, they may bring in their own set of resources that they have worked with in prior years. So what is your advice to folks that, that maintain and possess that institutional knowledge that still have a vigor for and desire to be relevant within the organization to continue learning?
I'm going to jump on this one, Charlie, real quickly.
Yeah.
There's a framework that I've been using lately. I was using it near the end of my tenure at FedEx called Q cubed. And it's really a set of leadership traits that are important. The first two we're really familiar with, IQ and EQ. So, it pays to be smart. I mean, if you want to stay relevant, you gotta work hard to, be smart. And, it also pays to have EQ, the relatability that's required in business today. But the one that gets missed most often, and it may be the most important in this fast-paced world, Ed, where we have changes like what you described, is AQ. And that's your adaptability quotient. I mean, it's crazy important that we're adaptable in this world, and so that we question ourselves and even some of the things that we are clutching to maybe and say, well, maybe, maybe the other guy's right. Maybe the new guy's right. Maybe there are some things we need to adapt to in order to stay relevant, in order to utilize those IQ and EQ skills. But work, read a little bit about AQ out there right now. There are some things showing up on AQ that is an important set of skills to learn to keep from being stubborn, because stubbornness will break that cycle that you're talking about, and stubbornness will get you pushed aside.
There's a question out there, and I'll start kind of from the highest level. Charlie, and for Rob too, but I know in working for a company, I've had the honor of being in a place where Charlie was the head storyteller. And so that idea of telling the importance of things, but making it relatable, something you said earlier, Rob, is just so compelling, and how it then sweeps through the whole organization when people know how they participate in making stories come to life. And so one of the things that, and so there's a question here from Ed at Great Dane, which is, how do you keep the storytelling? Because it's at various levels. So there's storytelling at an executive level, and Charlie, I've seen you be a master and wizard at that. And we have other folks on that I've had the good fortune of working with as well, that then are able to tell the story at like a next level down. Okay, so what does this really mean operationally? Or what does this mean to the customer or to the employee? How do you get those stories? Like, how do you make the skills, especially sometimes in organizations where we are rewarded for being very precise in order to code or make something happen? But how do you stay to a level? How do you develop those storytelling skills kind of throughout the range of kind of at the highest level all the way down to, but we need to have some stories to get to a common place?
Let me take a shot at it while Rob is thinking, because one of the things I learned early on was, if you go to the frontline people, they will tell you the story, right? If you go to the gate agent, at an airline, they know what's wrong. They don't know where the planes are. They don't know where the crews are, and everybody's up there. So getting them to tell you the story. If I had the ability to do this, to see this, same thing was true with the route salesman. So I love the idea that people are thinking about not just telling stories up to the executive committee, but down, because the stuff we do is going to change the life of every frontline person, right? And getting them to understand how their life will be better by getting them to help tell the stories. And that's where some of the ability twos and some of the stuff we do in the class. And I think we need to pick that up a little bit. I watched the making of Pixar, and I was just fascinated by the creative spirit of things go. And now there are so many tools out there. I know FedEx had not a whole group, but several people that if you put the idea on them, they could make Pixar looking screens for you. And it doesn't take a big investment to tell a story anymore. So, Rob, any thoughts on that?
Well, Meredith, I'm actually not sure I agree that the story has to be totally different for those audiences. We worked really hard to have those stories so that they worked in giant town halls, but they also worked at the board level, and at the XCOM level. Because if it's, especially if it's relatable, I think relatability doesn't really have a level. Relatability works across a lot of levels in an organization. So we tended to use the same story, whether we were talking, at a town hall in Asia, or to the FedEx corporate board, or at the Gartner symposium. I think stories should be relatable across a lot of different audiences.
Oh, Rob, I really appreciate the time, and you and I could go on for forever, and hopefully we will.